There's a moment in every sport when the thing everyone was afraid of actually happens. This is that moment. Formula One has survived wars, financial collapse, and the deaths of its greatest drivers. But the one thing it has never been able to survive is boredom. In the early 2000s, Michael Schumacher won 5 consecutive world championships. 5 in a row. And Formula One very nearly killed itself doing it. The dominance became a growing concern for the sport's popularity. People stopped watching, not because the racing was bad, but because they already knew how it ended. Every single Sunday. For 5 years, Schumacher's dominance forced F1 to confront an uncomfortable truth. The sport needs uncertainty. It needs rivalries. It needs someone who might lose. Because sport without the possibility of loss isn't sport, it's theater. So they repeatedly changed the technical and sporting rules in an effort to make the racing closer and more competitive. They restructured the prize money. They introduced budget caps. They did everything short of admitting what they were actually doing. Engineering the conditions for a fight. And then Formula One found the one driver who could turn that uncertainty back against them. His name is Max Verstappen, and he was not discovered. He was built. His father, Jos Verstappen, was an F1 driver himself. Decent, tough, never a champion. And by every account from people who knew him, Jos was determined that his son would not make the same mistakes he did. Max was in a cart before he could fully read. By the time most kids were playing video games, Max was being taught how to push a racing car to the absolute edge of its limits, and what to do when it goes past that edge. People who raced against him as a junior described it the same way, over and over. He just didn't seem afraid. Not fearless in a reckless way. Fearless in the way that's almost eerie, like the part of the brain that says this is dangerous, was simply never installed. He debuted in Formula One at 17 years old. Not 18, not 19, 17. He was still in high school, and in his very first race, the Spanish Grand Prix 2016, he won. The crowd didn't know whether to cheer or be afraid. They should have been afraid. Here's something the broadcast won't tell you. Heading into 2022, Formula One introduced the most dramatic regulatory overhaul in the sport's modern history. New cars, new budget caps, new aerodynamic rules built around a single ambition. Bring the cars closer together. Improve the racing. Give every team a genuine shot at competing at the front. This wasn't a small tweak. This was a full reset, and the early signs suggested it might actually work. Ferrari was fast, Mercedes was lurking, McLaren was showing up. For a few races in the spring of 2022, it genuinely looked like the chaos they'd promised. Then Red Bull figured it out. By mid-season, it was over. Verstappen won 15 races in 2022. Then in 2023, he won 19 out of 22. 19, one of the most dominant single seasons Formula One had ever seen. He didn't just break records. He made the question of who would win feel almost irrelevant before the lights even went out. The regulations designed to bring the field together had instead handed the sport's most complete driver a new technical environment that Red Bull understood faster than its rivals. Formula One had swung the pendulum so hard in one direction that it came all the way around and hit them in the back of the head. Now here's where this stops being a story about regulations and politics and starts being something much harder to explain. Because even if you gave every driver on the grid the same car as Max Verstappen, the same machinery, the same engineers, the same tires, the same strategy, the gap wouldn't close. Not fully. His teammates have confirmed it without meaning to. Sergio Perez, a genuinely elite Formula One driver, a man who has won Grands Prix, who has beaten world champions, spent 4 years in the same car as Verstappen. Across multiple seasons, the performance gap was too consistent to explain away with a single strategy call or isolated mistake. What separated them wasn't the car. It was the driver. Watch Verstappen's onboard footage in the wet. Watch how late he breaks into corners where other drivers have already given up. Watch how early he gets on the throttle. Watch how he reads a degrading tire not by feel alone, but with a kind of precision that makes it look mathematical. His braking confidence, his racecraft under pressure, his ability to adapt his driving style mid-race as conditions shift. These aren't things you can manufacture with a regulation change or close with a budget cap. And this is where it starts to feel like something F1 didn't fully plan for. They were afraid of a dominant team. They were afraid of a dominant car. They built entire rulebooks to prevent that. They never seriously considered what would happen if the dominant thing was the driver himself. Here's the question Formula One doesn't want asked in public. Is Max Verstappen bad for the sport? Not as a driver, as a product, as a commercial proposition. Casual fans, the ones who discovered F1 through Drive to Survive, who turned the sport into a genuine cultural moment in America. They tune in for drama, for chaos, for the feeling that anything could happen on any given Sunday. What they've gotten, most weekends, for the better part of 3 years, is a very fast Dutchman building a lead in the first lap and managing it to the flag. Liberty Media, the American company that now owns Formula One, paid over $4 billion for this sport with one core thesis: that it could become the next great global spectacle. Mainstream, primetime, appointment viewing in living rooms that had never once tuned into a race. That thesis requires parity. It requires LeBron versus Steph, Brady versus Manning. It requires the possibility that every single week that the best might lose. And right now, nobody on the grid has shown they can beat him consistently. And here's the truly uncomfortable part. The part that nobody in F1's leadership wants to say out loud: they made him this way. Think about what Formula One actually did. They created an environment where the most talented drivers reach the sport at 17. They built a commercial machine that rewards winning above everything else. In prize money, in sponsorship, in the culture of every team on the grid. They handed Red Bull, one of the most obsessive, brilliantly run operations in motorsport history, a regulatory reset that they decoded before anyone else even understood the question. And into the center of all of that, they placed a man who was raised from birth to do one thing, who has no off switch, who once said simply, "I don't compare myself to other drivers. I compare myself to what I think is possible." F1 needed a hero after the Schumacher era. They needed charisma and conflict and someone the cameras loved. What they got was a driver who doesn't perform for the cameras, who doesn't manufacture rivalries for the broadcast, who doesn't seem to need the sport's approval, its mythology, or its affection. What they got was someone who simply wins, relentlessly, methodically, like it's a problem to be solved rather than a feeling to be chased. And now the sport that once nearly died from one driver winning too much is watching history rhyme. Max Verstappen is not the villain of this story. He never asked to be the threat that F1 feared. He just showed up and did what he was made to do. And what he was made to do is better than anyone else on the planet. There are moments in a race, you've seen them, where something clicks and you realize you are watching one of the greatest drivers who has ever lived do something that shouldn't be physically possible. And in those moments, you feel two things at the same time. You feel the awe, and you feel the loss of tension, the loss of uncertainty, the loss of the question that makes sport worth watching. Can he be beaten? Because right now, the answer is not consistently. Not by any driver currently on the grid. Formula One spent decades trying to make sure no driver could own an era again. And now, once again, the sport is asking the same question it thought it had buried. What happens when one driver becomes the standard that everyone else has to chase? Maybe the monster isn't Max Verstappen. Maybe it's what happens to Formula One when someone becomes this difficult to beat. And the sport has no answer. Not in the rules. Not in the competition. Not anywhere. The frightening part isn't that Max has already dominated an era. It's that, at this point, we still don't know where his limit actually is. The monster doesn't know it's a monster. That's what makes it so hard to stop.